Everybody to thank you. I want to welcome everybody to this conversation with David Makovsky. I want to also thank the Jewish Community Relations Council for graciously agreeing to co-host with us and co-sponsor. And Rabbi Shafran, thank you for your participation and assistance. And of course, our thanks to David for agreeing to take of his time, and as precious as it is, and with all that's going on, and give St. Louis, his hometown and his home community, a little bit of a personal touch. I'm going to introduce David for those who don't know who he is, and most of us certainly do, but I'm going to introduce him. And then what I've suggest is that we're just going to allow David to do a presentation initially on what's going on in the Middle East, from Beirut to Damascus to Gaza to all around the Middle East and back. And then if there are questions, and I'm sure there will be that come in through the chat, then we'll try to address the questions after that. But let me take the opportunity first to thank David and to introduce him. David is the Ziegler Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute and director of the Koret Project on Arab-Israel Relations. He is also an adjunct professor in Middle East Studies at Johns Hopkins University's Paul H. Nitze School of Advanced International Studies, and president of the board for the National Library of Israel's U.S. affiliate. In 2013-2014, David worked in the office of the U.S. Secretary of State, serving as a senior advisor to the Special Envoy for Israel-Palestinian negotiations. He's the author of 3 books, 2 co-authored with Ambassador Dennis Ross, and his latest effort and project, which is most relevant in a certain sense to all of us because we can go from here and continue to listen to David on a regular basis, is he is the host of a podcast called Decision Points, which examines Israel's history and U.S.-Israel relations, which of course is what this conversation is all about. So with that introduction, I'm going to ask David to take over, and I will see you back after to help moderate the Q&A.
Thank you, Rabbi, very much. And people know me. They know me. It's either Mideast or Midwest. You can't take the Midwest out of the guy. And I remain loyal to St. Louis. So it's delighted to be with you, albeit virtually, and I hope to be back soon. Certainly, I have a daughter graduating at Wash U this spring, so I will definitely be back. And even though I miss my dad, but he's in Israel, but I'll still get back to St. Louis after hopefully the Cardinal team will improve, and I could come for some homestands and have a good shot, a Shabbat that. My shul in Young Israel, and I want to thank Rabbi Shulman and the JCRC for graciously hosting this. It's a season of Hanukkah. It's a time where we draw strength from the resilience of the Jewish people against very difficult odds, ability to, overcome adversity. And I think developments in the Mideast are coming so fast and furious. I do a weekly podcast, as Rabbi Shulman pointed out, on different themes related to the war, really. And it's going so fast that, I'm always concerned that we need another episode to fully digest just what happened in the last 48 hours. But there's no shortage of issues, but I try to have conversations with friends, colleagues, experts, and we try to take a certain theme going on in the news and go into an hour just on that one theme. I hope you people will listen in and give me your feedback. But let's start the dive now. If it's okay, I'm gonna share my screen here. We have some slides, and it'll. So I think I'm going to start. There's so many different fronts. Let's start with the hostages, because that's in the news. I just did a live thing for the BBC TV within the hour. I just said I can't do this hour 8 o'clock because I have a commitment. But so we did it an hour earlier. But they were interested in the hostages issue. People said, "Well, what's new there?" It's been reported in the news that the director of the CIA, Bill Burns, is en route to Qatar. That have been one of the mediators on the talks to get the hostages out. If you remember, Qatar had been hosting the external Hamas, had been funding things in Gaza, and finally, seemed like they washed their hands of it, and they kicked out the external Hamas leadership to Turkey in the last few weeks. And then when President-elect Trump said they'll be held to pay if this thing isn't solved by the day I'm inaugurated, the Qataris had, after pulling the plug on mediation, just came back in. So I think the conceptual hurdle is that why is there such optimism? I mean, we all pray every day, and I'm sure in people's prayers and in Psalms, and then just, they're thinking all the time about the hostages. So what's new? Manish Tana, what has changed? I think it's always been premised on basically three phases. A third of the hostages for a 6-week ceasefire. And the idea would be is that, you could maybe extend the ceasefire and maybe get more hostages out. But that was unclear. But the Hamas precondition was we're not allowing one hostage out unless you commit to a full withdrawal from Gaza. And Prime Minister Netanyahu did not want to do that. So there have been different permutations. There was a document in May. There was a document on July 2nd. Those are considered the big documents, May 27th and July 2nd, on how to look at these three phases. Now Hamas is at the point where they're not insisting as a precondition on a full withdrawal and in advance. You can argue, well, maybe it's because there's a ceasefire in Lebanon, and therefore, if there's a ceasefire in Lebanon, you've decoupled the fronts, so to speak, because they were firing at Israel in stereo, both from the south and the north. And Hamas and Hezbollah was going since October 8th of last year. And now with the ceasefire, Hezbollah is not firing. So they lost some leverage there. Iran, we'll get to that, is also had setbacks given the Israeli attacks in Iran, given other developments. There's been, of course, the loss for Iran of the Syrian regime, although Syria was not really a player in this. But it seems that Hamas is more isolated. On the flip side of the coin, they're going to, I'm sure the Egyptians and the Qataris are saying to them, the two mediators, why are you insisting all the time on a precondition? Trump wants to end the war anyway, so Israel won't say it's a full withdrawal, but it's going to go that way. And by insisting on it, Bibi's not going to do it. So basically, I think the conceptual hurdle, just to help people in St. Louis think about this, is that I think that Hamas is no longer making that precondition, and that is giving people hope. But now you get into the nitty-gritty, so to speak. The nitty-gritty is of the 33 out of like a third, right? Like 33 of the 100, 101 or whatever. How many of them will be alive of the 33 that will be released? Obviously, Israel wants to optimize the number who are released. And Israel's saying, look, we're not going to talk to you about the prisoners you want out until we know who we're getting. And if we're getting people in coffins, then it's not going to have the same value. Remember, the first phase is supposed to deal with like three categories. All the women who are there, the older prisoners, meaning older 50, and people who are called injured. Now, at this point, everybody there is injured. I mean, but that's called the humanitarian phase. Israel is trying to, I don't know if the word is cram in is the word, but to take people from the other category, which is anyone under 50 that Hamas calls a soldier. Now, if you're 49 years old, you're in the Israeli army? No, you're not in the Israeli army, but they call you a soldier because you could do reserve duty. And And so Israel is saying, don't give me coffins, give me live males, soldiers in that phase. So right now, Israel has not gotten the list. Now, it does seem to be accurate that Hamas says is that they don't hold all of the people, that some are with the Islamic Jihad. Some have been like subcontracted to families of Gaza who get money for keeping these people. And Israel's saying, look, we have to know who we're getting. You can't just tell us, trust us. We don't trust you. And if you want to get your prisoners, then you've got to tell us who the hostages we're getting out. So I think a lot of the nitty gritty is finding out who are the 33 that are going to be in phase one. And I understand the families of those who are not in phase one who said, look, my son is, 40 years old or whatever. He's not going to be in that category. And phase two is after Israel is leaving. So is there even going to be a phase two? I think is a real question. I'm not so sure. But you can say, look, whoever you could save, at least get those people out. Now, the other piece related to phase one that I think is at the core of this is, and this to you will sound very maybe technical, but it's important, is what happened in the Shalit deal in 2011. I know this sounds to you like out of a Hollywood movie, but welcome to the Middle East, is once they get into the zone, as I would call it, where Hamas is saying, okay, tell me which prisoners are getting out. My understanding is there's 571 Hamas people who have been convicted as lifetime prisoners because they killed Israelis in terror incidents, and they've been convicted in an Israeli court. These are the people, obviously, Hamas wants to get out. Originally, we thought Sinwar himself wanted them because they were his colleagues and he promised them they would get out. But in the end, he was holding out for more, and he didn't get any of these people out. He got out some low-level people in November 2023, as you see on the slide, for 105 hostages, but they want to get out the heavy-duty people. Now, the part that's going to sound to you like a Hollywood movie is the question is, how do you have that negotiation with a party you don't even talk to them? So what happened in 2011, and I talked to people in Egyptian intelligence about this, is that there, and I've been to the Egyptian intelligence headquarters. I don't want to make it sound like I'm there a lot. I'm not, but I've been there a few times. It's a complex. So let's say Israel is sitting with Egypt in one building of the complex, and then Egypt is shuttling between buildings inside the Egyptian intelligence complex, and Hamas is in the other building, or in one of the buildings. And then they just go from building to building, back and forth. You say this name, well, we want this name. You say this name, we want this name. There's clearly going to be, and I was told there's at least 100 of those names that Israel feels it cannot release, because, you could say, look, always be humble. In 2011, when Israel released 1,027 for one Gilad Shalit, did they know that Yahya Sinwar would go to be the leader of Hamas? No, they didn't know. I don't think they would have released him, but they had to release him, by the way, because his brother, Mohammed, was the one who was actually the one who captured Shalit in order to spring his brother Yahya. So he had to be let go, but I don't think they had any sense that he was going to be the leader. So here, all the pressure is really on the Shin Bet organization to ensure that any of the people released is not a possible Sinwar. And then the question is who's deported or who gets to go back to the West Bank. And then what about the families of those people, who killed their daughter, their son, their this, their that? It's going to be traumatic that suddenly those people are going to go free. So I would say, put the tray table in the upright position and fasten your seatbelt. I think it's going to get bumpy for the next couple of weeks if this thing does move forward. I don't think they're going to say in real time, we're thinking of releasing this one or that one, but it could be some things will trickle out, and we'll have to see. But once, to me, they're sitting in Cairo, the head of the Shin Bet and the head of Egyptian intelligence with one of the leaders of Hamas could be what's his name? Mohammed Al-Khaya, who's kind of runs the negotiations, or Khalil Al-Khaya, excuse me. Then I think it's really serious, because then you're really in the shook and in the market to see which names, and Israel has to be sure that the people they release are not going to be, the worst of the worst. So now let's assume phase one goes forward. Look at the next slide here about the look of Gaza. And you might have heard references in the news. I don't know if you see a yellow line that goes across here where it says the Nitzarim corridor. Now, why is that important? The Nitzarim corridor has been at the core of this negotiation in the north, and in the south, where it's called the Rafah crossing at the bottom of the slide. That the bottom of the Egyptian Gaza border is called the Philadelphia corridor. Why it's called Philadelphia? Did somebody from Philadelphia give money to Gaza? No. I think it has something to do with the way the computer was set up. I don't think it means anything about Philadelphia. But basically, Israel had been insisting that it stay in Philadelphia along that corridor and along the Tsarim to make sure that there's not a return of Hamas terrorists to the Gaza City, which has been at the core. If you remember, they hit Gaza City. That was the first month of the ground incursion. It was all about Gaza City. Jabalia is a key refugee camp, and Israel has been in and out of there 4 times. And it's been the fiercest fighting of the war, I would say. Israel wants to be sure that the terrorists don't go all the way north in a way that they could get up to near the Erez crossing and be right near Israeli towns that are, like the areas that got hit on October the 7th. Now, it's true, it's called an otef. That means an envelope. The Israeli towns are just not at the northern part of Gaza. They're all alongside it. And basically, the compromise there is Hamas wants nobody at the Netzarim crossing. It wants anybody who wants to go back to their homes to be able to go back to their homes. And the same with Philadelphia. Israel has agreed on it looks like, a compromise thing where it will keep some soldiers deployed, but not in the same numbers. So Israel hasn't officially left Netzarim, hasn't left Rafah, the Philadelphia corridor, and therefore could go back in. You've had a lot of the former Israeli generals saying, look, 42 days, Israel has plugged up these tunnels. There's nothing that in 42 days, the Egyptians will be on their side. Israel will have at least a symbolic presence. There's nothing that Hamas can do in those 42 days, and Israel could go back into these places after 42 days. So these are going to be, I think, the contours of the hostage negotiations. So it seems to me you've got progress on delinking not just the fronts between Hezbollah and Hamas, but delinking the issue of full withdrawal, which Hamas had not agreed to. Now it seems like they have. Israel has agreed to dilute its forces on Nitzarim and Philadelphia. And then the issue is, Israel wants 33 live people, not 33 coffins. And that, I think, is the biggest issue, because Israel's saying, listen, until we get the list, we're not telling you what prisoners you're going to get if we don't know what hostages we're going to get first. And Israel's trying to bring in people from that second category, the males under 50. If, they say, if you don't have 33 live people, we don't want coffins now, we want live people, and take from the category 2, the males. And that seems to be an issue. But it's all about really a third of the hostages. That's where it's at. Anyway, I'm sorry that's a lot of detail, but I just feel that this is an audience that follows things, and I just wanted to do a dive on that. Let's go up to talking about Syria now, if we could. And here was a map that I liked because it's not a typical map. And it shows you the difficulties. And Rabbi Shulman mentioned Turkey, that's north of Syria. Syria it's a country that's really been hollowed out by Iran in many ways and by the leadership. What people need to realize, and it's hard for people maybe to understand, but Syria has been run by the Alawites, who mostly live on the coast of the Mediterranean. You see the red here, Latakia. Assad has got a summer home there. His father did too. Tartus, being it's an Alawite, it's they're very loyal to the regime. It's an Alawite regime. Tartus there's a Russian naval base there. There's also a place nearby there, a Russian Air Force base too that they've added recently. what happened to Syria is you've had for the last 54 years, it wasn't, it was different leadership before that too, but the Alawites have been running it. They're only 12% of the population. I know it's hard for people to understand this. You're saying, tell me, David, 12% are ruling 88? Yes. And the only way you could do that is with an iron fist. And the net effect was that the Sunnis really stopped joining the military because they saw this as a regime to protect the Alawites as on behalf of the Alawites. The Alawites are an offshoot of the Shia. Remember, in the Arab world, the Muslim world, you've got the Shia and the Sunni. The Sunni dominates the Arab world, but the Shiites, for example, dominate Iran. And that's why Iran has got an affinity. If you remember the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, the whole Arab world lined up with Iraq, a fellow Sunni regime. The only ones in the Arab world that lined up with Iran was Syria because they're an Alawite regime. They're an offshoot of the Shia. And so what's happened is as the Alawites have tightened their grip on the country, the Sunnis stopped joining the army and it became weaker. And what also happened is the father Assad always understood if you're a minority, you have to think strategically, who can you get as bigger players to back you? Because alone you can't do much. So, the Soviet Union was a big giver to the Hafez al-Assad regime, but then the Soviet Union collapsed. The Iranians, they became big, and they started funding them. And by the way, you go way back, you look at the Syria, the wars with Israel of 48, 67, and 73, Syria never attacks alone. They always want to do it with Egypt. They're always looking for like a strategic partner. And so the regime has used its iron fist, and it's been going on now. The repression against their own people since 2011, and they've even gassed their own people. This is a world news story. And what's happened though is there's kind of breaking apart. So the Kurds, were helping the United States in the east, the green and the upper green, the northeast part of Syria. They were helping the U.S. against ISIS. And the U.S. is grateful to the Kurds. The Israelis have always thinks the Kurds are like the Jews among the Arabs, that they've been shortchanged and they've thought they should have a state. The U.S. Has got 900 troops along the green area. Anything what's called east of the Euphrates River, which you see kind of winds its way in the eastern part of Syria. So, they would like to stay in their own area. The Israeli Druze, D-R-U-Z-E, have their families live in southern Syria. It's the same families in Sueda and places like that, in the blue area, in the lower part of the map. So, so you've got Alawites in the west, you've got Kurds in the east, you've got Druze in the south, and now what the Turks are trying to do has been to back the Sunnis, saying, hey, man, we're 88%, or if you minus the Kurds and the Druze, and maybe it's a little less, but they were in the northern part, they were funding the Sunnis. And their view is we've got like 3 million Syrian refugees. They're terrified. We want them to go back home and not take, money from Turkey or take from Jordan or take from Lebanon or, some in Europe hoping the Syrian refugees go back. I mean, good luck to them. I don't think that's going to happen when people don't know what Syria is going to be. But Turkey has been funding the Sunnis because they're saying is, we get your game plan, Assad. You'd love to drive all the Sunnis out and keep, as much of the country for the Alawites. So they timed it brilliantly from their perspective to really make that push from the north where Aleppo is all the way down to Damascus in like a lightning strike going through Hama, Homs. I think it's like 170 kilometers from Homs to Damascus to say, okay, there's a ceasefire. The Israelis have kind of done our work for us. I think the Talmud says, Bahavdil, that the righteous, their work is done by others. Okay, Hezbollah can't come to your rescue. The Iranians can't come to the rescue. They're distracted because they've been hit by Israel on its own. The crown jewel of the Iranian proxy network is Hezbollah. They've been battered. So, and the Russians have got a war in Turkey. I mean, a war against the Ukrainians. Now, what we didn't know, I think, fully was how much the Ukrainians have been helping these rebels with drones, and the Turks have been helpful too. So right now, this rebel group has come down, has taken over at a lightning speed. The army gave in without a shot because, like I said, the military's been hollowed out, and the Sunnis don't want to fight for this regime that they just think tortures them, and it's brutal. And now you see on the news all these stories of people been just thrown away in these prisons. It's remarkable anybody's alive there. I mean, it's these torture chambers. And then the question is, okay, tell me about the new regime, David. And the truth is, we have to always be humble because we're not 1,000% sure. These guys come out of the ISIS, Al Qaeda, the Sunni Islamist world kind of thing. And now they claim that they've broken from them, they've even fought them, but what they say and what they do might not be the same thing. Right now, they're desperate for money. And when you're desperate for money, you might say anything. They want world support so they can have a central government there. And so it's unclear, how much this new government, what's called HDS, Hayat al-Tahrir al-Shams, meaning the Organization for the Liberation of Shams. Sham is like Semites, for, the Levant. So are they Al-Qaeda? Are they, the one thing we know is they hate the Iranians, they hate Hezbollah, who they see as completely aligned with the Assad regime. So we know one thing for sure, that this is an incredible setback for Iran and an incredible setback for Hezbollah. And it's really the best hope that the ceasefire in Lebanon has a chance to hold. I was just with Amos Hochstein, who I know, who was the U.S. Negotiator. And why is it so crucial? And here it's hard for you to see, but if you see this place called Al-Tanf in like kind of the southeastern part, just above the Druze area on the right, a lot of convoys were coming through there and going in what became known as the land bridge, starting in Tehran, going through Iraq, going through Syria, and going to resupply Hezbollah. Now, if Hezbollah is now the sworn enemy of these people, this is horrible news for Hezbollah, great news for Israel, that Iran is persona non grata, Hezbollah is persona non grata. I do remind people that Iran has found a way, even though they're Shia, to work with Hamas, that's Sunni. So it's not like they can't, but it's not just up to them because the Syrians see them as the devils. Now, could that change? Anything could change. You always have to be cautious. But for now, it's a huge setback. So weaponry for resupply is not coming in. People say, well, what about the Beirut airport? I mean, that's something that Israel is all over that. And they've turned away Iranian planes. But the convoys are much bigger on overland. And right now, we think they can't resupply. So we don't know, is this government going, they talk a good game saying, oh, we broke from Al Qaeda, we're helping minorities, the women don't have to cover their hair in the same way, we're not out to fight Israel, but we don't know for sure. HTS, this organization, is on the United States terrorism list, what's called an FTO, a foreign designated terrorist organization. And that gives the US some cards to play to say, listen, you want our money, European money for reconstruction, but we need to be sure that you purge all these other elements, and we need proof. So we don't know yet. Again, always be humble. There's stuff you don't know. But I think the U.S. has some cards to play, and I don't think they're going to give away the cards so soon. Now, what does this mean for Israel? Israel is doing some incredible things right now. What Israel is doing two things, really. First of all, just as the United States in CENTCOM, the Central Command, the U.S. Military Command, is going after ISIS camps in the Kurdish zone, what's happening is Israel is just destroying whatever airplanes, tanks, weapons that the old Assad regime had, saying, look, it never hurts to be safe. We don't want to tempt anybody and say, oh, I'll take that old MiG-29 from the Soviet era. Israel doesn't want to give them that. And so Israel's just destroying left and right, whatever weapons. Some people say 80% of Assad's weapons are gone. I haven't seen a verification, but whatever it is, it's a high number, and no one is stopping Israel. So it's unprecedented in Israel's history that a key building block in the Arab world has suddenly disappeared. And remember, because they were always a minority regime, the Alawites, they always had to be, excuse the phrase, frummer than thou in a certain way. They had to always be able to outflank people from the right. We're the beating heart of Arabism. We're rejectionists. That was the legitimacy of the old Assad regime, that we are not Egypt, we are not Jordan, because they're too Zionistic, they're accommodationists with Israel, they make peace treaties. No, not us. There was a time in the 90s, we could talk about it, that they were toying with it, but they didn't do it. And now, so now the regime is gone. Israel's trying to destroy the weapons. The other element what Israel's doing, and Bibi was up there today in the Golan, is if you remember from 1974, those of you who remember the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War, there was a whole area called the disengagement, where Israel, under Kissinger, was called, the first disengagement. There was one in the Sinai, but there was one in the Golan Heights in 74. Israel saying, listen, we don't want any October 7th. These guys say all these nice words. I hope they're right. They don't want to fight us, blah, blah, blah. That's great, but we're not sure, and we can't take a chance. So Israel has just poured into the demilitarized buffer zone of 74 that they pulled out of. And Netanyahu, said today, I saw on the news, the evening news tonight in Hebrew, he said something, we're going to stay there until there's a new arrangement. The UN and elements in France and other places are saying, hey, man, you can't go in there. You've signed an agreement that you would stay out. And Israel's saying, look, it's a new circumstance. We don't know who these people are, and we can't take a risk of another October 7th. Now, these people have other fish to fry. I was talking to someone from the Pentagon yesterday, and I said, how worried are you? He said, I think if they're going to turn on anyone, it's the Kurds. Because that's where the Turks come in, because without boring you with too much here with this, the Turks see that there's a faction of the Kurds called the PKK, and they are people who've used violence against Turkey. Now, most Kurds are not PKK, but they are totally anti-Turkish, and so the Kurdish. And so the question is are the Kurds going to be able to keep their own autonomy? Are the Druze going to have their autonomy? Are the Alawites going to have their autonomy? If this regime is fragile, maybe they will be decentralized, and maybe that's not bad. Trump, when the last time around, in the first Trump years, he wanted to pull 900 troops out of Kurdistan because Erdogan and him were friendly, the leader of Turkey, and he says, save the money, Donald, I'll protect you, just pull the troops out. The only time that I asked several people about this, the only time in the whole Trump administration that they voted against Trump in the Congress was when he said he was going to pull the plug on the Kurds. And people thought that's wrong. They defended America. They went against ISIS. They suffered a lot of casualties. We cannot abandon them again the way they've been abandoned in the past. So it'll be interesting how far the Turks push. Do they push into that green zone or not? Is there going to be decentralization? Or is this country going to try to centralize? Are they going to go after the Alawites, who they think were their butchers? And then are they going to butcher the Alawites? And is there a bloodbath ahead? The answer is we just don't know. We have to always be humble. When we don't know and there's uncertainty, we just have to say it. All right, let me say something about Lebanon and then and Iran real fast. And I'll try to make this short. Look, you've been following this too. 60 days is the period. It started out, basically the Iranians told Nasrallah, listen, you want to fight the Israelis on the border to harass them, to pin down Israeli troops so they don't all go to the south against Hamas? Go ahead, but don't do an all-out war against Israel, because we need you as a second strike if the Israelis hit our nuclear program, that you will hit Tel Aviv. But as Nasrallah got into it, he pushed further and further. I don't think he could have dreamed that Israel would decapitate them. I mean, it sounds like a Netflix movie, the whole thing with the beepers and the walkie-talkies. And then the net effect was that when you don't have communication equipment, you have to actually meet in person. When you meet in person, that's when Israel was able to lower the boom on much of the whole top tier was decapitated, that including Nasrallah himself. So now there's a ceasefire, and the big break that Israel got is the fall of Syria. Again, I'm not saying a big break in terms of what's going to be in 5 or 10 years from now, but big break for now that it's much harder now for Iran to resupply Hezbollah, and Hezbollah was really hit hard. Iran was the one basically, from what we hear, our sources are saying the Iranians were the one who told Hezbollah, look, you don't even have enough top tier people left. We got to just pull the plug on this, and they did, and so we'll see. Now I keep thinking to myself, what am I not thinking of? Could Iran, which doesn't, can they use money in reconstruction and try to rebuild the Dakhia neighborhood in Beirut, which is the Hezbollah stronghold? And is that a way of keeping their foot in the door, so to speak? And I think they really could do that. I think that's something to be thought about, is what sort of Iranian money is going in. But it's clear, by the way, that the Iranians, they abandoned Assad, the Russians abandoned Assad. And I think the ceasefire, though, has a better chance than it did. I think the fact that there's now the U.S. Central Command, and Israel has outstanding relations with the U.S. Central Command, that's the Middle East Command. One of the great strategic windfalls for Israel, I think, is that it became part of the Middle East Command. It was always kind of in the European Command. Last few years, it's been in the Middle East Command. And General Kurilla has been a rock star, working with the Israelis very closely. And so the CENTCOM is going to be dealing with ceasefire violations. So we'll have to see. The last point is just, and then I'll stop. Well, I should say a word about Saudi Arabia too. Is the strikes on Iran? Look, you had on October 26th, you had 3 waves of strike. General Kurilla of CENTCOM was in Israel in advance to plan this. It's a little dicier than April 13th, because that was a defensive hit by Iran attacking Israel. This is Israel hitting Iran, and the U.S. did not want to be associated with an offensive strike in the same way. But there were 3 waves. Israel had 140 planes. My information is that a lot of the planes that hit the air defenses of Iran were done in Iraqi airspace. And people might ask me, why did they do it from Iraqi airspace? Part of this was because I know it's going to sound to you, maybe a little esoteric, but it's important, is that the Iranian foreign minister went to Jordan, went to Saudi Arabia, went to the Emirates, and said, we know you're friends with the Israelis. If you let Israel overfly your airspace, Iran said, we could hit your energy infrastructure. Now, Israel wants to tell Jordan and Saudi Arabia and the UAE, you're a friend of Israel, we're not out to make your life harder. And so Israel did not overfly those countries. Israel went to the so-called friends of Iran, which was Syria and Iraq, and made sure the strikes came from there. But, they have no sophisticated air defenses. My understanding is from a White House official that not any of the S-300s, this Russian air defense system, even laid a finger, even fired a shot at Israel. 140 planes, hours in the air, and Israel wiped out Iranian air defenses, the advanced ones. I think they have some more primitive ones, but, I love sports, as many of you know. Think of a hockey game where the other team doesn't have a goalie, or a soccer team, they don't have a goalie. The net is wide open. And so if you had to ask me, and I know this is being taped, and so, people are going to hold me to this, I do think that 2025 could be the year that Israel actually hits the Iranian nuclear program, which Israel avoided right before the U.S. election. President Biden said, don't hit nukes and don't hit oil. We know you've been hit. Then it was 200, ballistic missiles in an hour, a country the size of New Jersey. Never in military history has a country been hit the way Israel has been. But don't hit oil. That could have an impact on the price of oil in the United States. And don't hit the nukes because it won't end. But now Israel's had a couple rounds with Iran, both in response to April 13th and in response, to the October strikes. So the question for me is, to what extent does, I just find talking to Israelis, I just convened a conference where I brought over a dozen senior Israelis, many of them names you might have heard of, but I just sense that the conversation is not should Israel hit, but when will Israel hit? Now, a lot of this has to deal with a dialogue with President Trump when he comes into office. We'll see. President Trump has said, I don't want to start wars, I want to end wars. And I think a very fair question is, if I get asked this in the chat, is can Israel hit Fordo, the nuclear mountain, the mountain where the nuclear program is inside a mountain? And I'm not sure Israel can. And I've just talked to a very senior Israeli defense person who made clear to me that the U.S. could do a better job when it comes to Fordo. Could Israel hit other things? Could the U.S. and Israel have some, division of labor? I think the U.S. would prefer using sanctions to get Iran to move away from its nuclear program. I don't know if it will. Right now, Israel's saying they have no goalie. How long is that for? What if the war in Ukraine ends? Could by the end of the year or 6 months, can the Russians find some S-300s? Again, the S-300s, I wouldn't want to export that because it didn't do anything against Israel. But there's something called the S-400s. Right now, they can't spare the system. So we'll see. But I think this is going to be a big conversation. Are the U.S. and Israeli, clocks in sync? Would the U.S. say, well, let's give this time. Let's try sanctions. Let's see how it goes. And Israel might say, yeah, but we can't go on too long because they might, restore air defenses and it'll be a different ballgame. Anyway, it's fascinating to look at. The last issue, and I'm sorry to talk so long, I'll make it very short, is the Saudi business. The Saudi thing is going back to sports. It's a game changer. It's the Super Bowl of all peace agreements. This is the most powerful, influential Arab country. It would mark the end of the Sunni Arab war against Israel since 1948. Once you have a deal with Saudi Arabia, they are proud to say they would bring in other Gulf states, they would bring in other Muslim countries. It's the granddaddy or grandmother of all peace agreements. And why did the Saudis want it? The Saudis want it because they want a defense treaty with the United States, and they see it as a package deal. And in their mind, the package deal is, you in the U.S., you've got NATO. Germany has NATO. If Putin hits Germany, the U.S. goes to war for Germany. No one goes to war for Saudi Arabia. So they want their own treaty. The U.S. has not had a treaty. That's 2/3 of the Senate, since 1960. And Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince known as the MBS for his acronym, he wants a treaty with the U.S. And the U.S. has said to him, you want a treaty, make peace with Israel. That'll get you your 67 senators, because the Democrats and Republicans, they can't even agree what day of the week it is, if it's light out or dark outside. But peace, they could agree on. So that, MBS wants the deal. He's a different generation than his father. Bibi wants the deal. Biden desperately wants the deal. But since October the 7th, the Saudis are saying, look, we have a public opinion too. We might not be a democracy, but all these, visuals in the Arab world of all the humanitarian damage done in Gaza, we cannot be viewed as sellouts. You got to give us something on the Palestinians. And Netanyahu is afraid that anything on the Palestinian issue would be used by Smotrich and Ben-Gvir to bring down the government. And so he wants this to be a strictly, trilateral U.S., Saudi, Israeli deal with no provision, no footnote on the Palestinians. And right now the Saudis are holding out. What Bibi was hoping for is that when Trump comes in, he has a relationship with Mohammed bin Salman, and he will say, let the Palestinian issue go. We'll deal with it another time. Let's just do this granddaddy of peace deals. And we'll see if that's possible. If it happens, I could tell you the military establishment in Israel sees this as a game changer. It would cement an anti-Iranian alliance in the Middle East. It would be huge. That's what the defense establishment wants. The public wants this too. But Netanyahu doesn't want this condition on something on the Palestinians. By the way, it isn't even a state. It's about having a negotiation towards a state or having the U.S. recognize something about a Palestinian state, even though the status quo is continuing. And so there's a lot of vagueness right now, and I think when Trump comes in, we'll see what happens. I think in the Trump administration, I'll conclude on this point, I think there's two strands. There's a strand, I would call it, if I had to call it, the David Friedman school with Huckabee, who's going to be the new U.S. ambassador, that thinks what's important is annexation. And there's what I would call the Trump Kushner school. Kushner isn't even in the government, but I think it'll be very influential, that wants to see, building upon the Abraham Accords by doing this grand deal with the Saudis. So we'll see. I would bet on the Trump school over the Huckabee school, but we'll have to view it. I don't want to predict it's definitely going to happen, because I do think the Palestinian dimension to any deal, while it's vague, amorphous, I think it might be difficult for Netanyahu. And while he wants this deal desperately, he also wants his government to stay in power desperately. Okay, I'm going to stop here. And I just want to, I'm sorry if I threw too much at you, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of some of the things that are going on. And I look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Rabbi.
Wow, that was quite a mouthful. I think you can take a moment to breathe now, because
Okay.
I don't think you paused for a breath there. But I to the best that I can, I've sort of a couple of questions have been coming in, and a couple of questions that I had from before the presentation. I'm kind of trying to combine them and do them in the same kind of arenas that you laid out for us, even though the Middle East is never an area where you can isolate one arena over the other. But I want to actually start. Obviously, the big question right now in the news is Syria and the status of this HTS group, and so the question of the devil we know and the devil we don't know. The question of, do we play nice with them? Do we engage with them? Are we really expecting them to, realistically, what's your guess? Are we expecting them to be true to what they're saying rather than their background? And I think you touched on it, but maybe we can zero in on that piece for a
Look,
second.
I think the point is,
question.
yeah. I think the key, Rabbi, is the leverage. The U.S. has leverage by calling HTS an FTO, meaning a foreign terrorist organization, a designated organization by the State Department. It means American companies, and sometimes there's secondary sanctions. I have to look into this. European countries can't really help in reconstruction, dealing with an FTO, or else their banking relationships in the U.S. could be hurt. And these countries are very careful in Europe. Not, they know their relations with America is the bread and butter. Here is an esoteric little country. They don't know exactly. So the U.S. has a great card to play, which is, we want you to be a normal country, be like Jordan, be like Egypt, be non-brotherhood, just be straight. And if we know that the money's going to reconstruction of a normal society, I mean, they have I don't know if you could hear, they have virtually no foreign currency reserves, these people. I mean, it is a basket case of a country. And so they are very desperate, and the U.S. is counting on them being desperate to say, you want us, then this is what we need from you. And if we think that you are somehow, if our intelligence or the Israeli intelligence is picking up that you are actually ISIS in disguise or Al Qaeda in disguise or something, we're not going to lift the FTO. We're not going to lift the foreign terrorist organization designation on you. So I think that's where the play is. Now, there's going to be another layer, Rabbi, gets a little complicated, is Trump personally. Trump himself, like I said, with the Kurds in 2018, I believe, he just said, hey, I could save 900 jobs by bringing these soldiers back. And then there was such a hullabaloo Again, coming from Republicans and Democrats, they said this is not the Seder, like these people saved us. They died for us against ISIS, these Kurds. And then when they need us, we run away. So I think Trump's instinct is the fewer American soldiers, the better. But that leaves the Kurds exposed. And so I think the point here is I personally hope Trump leaves the American troops. It's called the SDF, the Special Democratic Forces is what they call the Kurds, but that green part in the eastern part of the country, I hope he leaves them and says, listen, they kept the peace on that side of the Euphrates River. Let them stay until we know what are the intentions of these people. And with these people, I would play tough. I would just say, listen, we are not lifting FTO status on you guys unless we see evidence. We don't want just words. We need to see deeds that you are putting together a government, also non-Islamists, or else we fear there's going to be a brotherhood government. And so I think, we should say, the proof is in the pudding. And after we see that this government really is more inclusive and more, pluralistic and the like, and you're really protecting minorities and the Turks are not pushing against the Kurds and things like that. Okay, we'll think about it, but we're not going to give it to you up front. No way can you give it to them up front. But maybe on humanitarian, that I would do. I'd bring in medical aid. I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, the Israelis have done this beautifully in the past, that they open up a certain gate, a gate of good neighbors, that if the Druze, who are right there, neighbors right there, but also the Druze are, as you know, the Israeli Druze are in the army. I've seen the funerals. I mean, a lot of these people died in the country. Remember when those 12 kids were killed on a soccer field in the Golan, and the Israelis made sure that Israel stood up for them, because you can't have it that Druze children are killed, nothing happens, and only if Jewish kids happen. So Israel's very sensitive about Druze, that they feel very, warmly embraced. And I wouldn't be surprised, and not just Druze, that they find other southern Syrians and they get them, allowed to go to the Rambam hospital in Haifa and other hospitals. I think Israel's going to do things on the humanitarian side that will show that they want to help. But I think it's one thing to help humanitarian, for the Syrian people. It's another thing to give an open check and advance credit to HTS. I think they need to earn it.
And flipping to the other side of Syria, Turkey is starting to make moves against the Kurds. And Turkey is a member of NATO.
Yeah.
With all of the complexity of Turkey and their rhetoric over the last year, they are a member of NATO. So how does that and the NATO piece
Look, I can tell you, when I was talking to someone from the White House on the hostages, when they were talking about the relocation of Khalid Mashal and Khalil al-Khaya and all the Qatari Hamas to Turkey. He said, "Look, David, he said we've got leverage. They're a NATO country at the end of the day." I will also say, well, I don't trust Erdogan at all. I don't trust him because of some of the outrageous things he says. I will say that when the Brotherhood came to power in Egypt in 2011, Morsi, he did, I even think even before they came to power, he made a visit and he said, whatever you do, go very, very slow. In other words, you've got to build up credit with your people economically and things like that. So I do think that Turkey is constrained somewhat. I don't want to overstate that. Everyone's going to be looking at the point you mentioned about, did the Turks try to, have this new government push into the Kurdish area? I think so long as the U.S. is there, they're protected anyway. So that's another reason why I just hope Trump doesn't pull them out. It was a rare situation. I'm not familiar with all the details, but I know two people in the Trump administration who worked this issue, and they were horrified. They were not given any advance notice by Trump. He just spoke to Erdogan and says, what do you need it for? It's just too much expenses. It's money. Donald, I'll do it. I'll pay. Don't worry. You could take your troops home back to America. And he said, okay, I'm pulling them out. And there was a rear guard action from within the administration that constrained Trump. In the end, his order was not followed. and the 900 American troops stay to this day because of that.
So just to shift around for a
Sure.
moment, and I just want to make a comment that I think is important for those that we had a little bit of a technical glitch at the beginning of the meeting, and so there was a limited capacity for entrance into the meeting that was lifted in the middle. So there are a number of people who signed on late, and I know that you've dealt with the whole issue of the hostages and the negotiations and the Hamas at the very beginning of the presentation. It's in the recording. So anybody who signed on after that part of the presentation will be able to hear it in the recording. But one piece of it that I wanted to kind of come back to is we keep talking about negotiations with Hamas, and we keep talking about the question of the stages and that they're now discussing. In your estimation, what's left of Hamas realistically to govern or to be involved in all of this? We're negotiating with the body that we are then going to turn around and say, well, you're non-existent, or you shouldn't exist, or you should. Like, how much of Hamas is left to be able to do this?
Here's the thing, we don't fully know. It's a great question. I don't think the answer is as good as the question. Look, Israel was counting on, once Sinwar was killed, that the change in the balance of power, I don't know if you could, a change in the balance of power meant that the external Hamas, meaning Khalil al-Khaya and Khalid Mashal, there was a guy named Hania, but he's no longer with us because Israel killed him, in Iran. But the hope was that external Hamas would make the decisions, and they were more amenable to being squeezed by the Qataris, who want to be on good relations with the U.S., and the Egyptians who want to be in good relation with the U.S. Because until then, one guy made all the decisions, and he was in a cave somewhere, and the tunnel was Sinwar. So now there's no Sinwar. Now there's a brother, this Mohammed Sinwar that I referenced earlier in my remarks. He's one of the three, I'm told, on the inside who is still a player. But he doesn't have the stature of his brother. And so therefore, what the U.S. is counting, and Israel are counting on, is that now there are more decision makers in the Hamas system. And, to me, again, I hope you're not reading tea leaves, and, you don't want to get too excited about things. But I noticed suddenly that Khalid Mashal's brother got out of jail last week. He'd been held by Israel for a long time. To me, when I see that, I'm always looking for telltale signs, is that, Israel wants the external Hamas, where Mashal is, to make part of the decision, and they want to give him something. And so, if suddenly Hamas says, okay, we're not going to make this a precondition that you have to withdraw from Gaza before we start phase one, and we can agree on the 33, maybe Israel will say, you know what, to get those 33 people alive, we'll give up on the brother who's been there for, I don't know how long, in Israeli prisons. So we don't know. Now, your question is important, not just on the hostage issue, who are the deciders, what's the balance of power, external or internal Hamas. Frankly, it gets to a very fundamental point that I didn't even have time to get into, but you've given me an opening to do a little bit here. So if I'll just say on the tip of the iceberg is the question of the day after, which is, who is going to be in charge of Gaza? If once the war is over, and we think that, Trump wants this to be able to say, I've ended it, but who's there? And I am concerned that you can't defeat Hamas unless you compete with Hamas, meaning if there's a vacuum and it looks like Mogadishu on the Mediterranean, then Hamas will, by default, will be in charge again. Look, to me, when you have 4 times you've gone into Jabalia, and Jabalia, like I said, fierce fighting. I showed you that refugee camp in northern Gaza. But when the Israeli army has to go in 4 times, and all the people on this call has some relative or friend or someone who's on reserve duty, if there was someone there who was in charge, maybe Israel wouldn't have to go in. And I talked to David Petraeus, the former head of the CIA, who I know, and he has this whole thing, which is clear an area, and then hold the area and then build the area. And he just said to me, David, they're not doing it. The Israelis are not clearing the area. They have to go in and out, in and out. Now, what some of the hard right people like Smotrich want to do is they want Israel to stay, take over all of Gaza, and build settlements. I know it's hard for some people to even imagine this, but that's what they want. And Bibi is trying to somehow kind of navigate between Trump on one hand and Smotrich on the other hand. He's trying to tell Trump, well, the war is just about over. And I think he might declare end of major operations, especially he doesn't want to declare until he gets as many of the hostages out as possible, but that's what he would like to declare. But tell Smotrich, but we're not really leaving because we have some mop-up things in Jabalia, and we have mop-up areas other places. Now, whether you could thread that needle, I don't know, but I think it hurts when I talk to the defense establishment people. There's something about their pride as professionals. They see military as an instrument towards policy. It's like, okay, I'm fighting, but tell me what I'm fighting for. Tell me that we've got a plan. Who's going to fill the gap? And I think, many of the people, even on the right of center people that I talk to, will quietly say, the Palestinian Authority should come in and they will be a counterpoint to Hamas. They're trained by the U.S. They work closely with the Israelis, but this government doesn't want to say that. I think they don't mind the result, but they don't want to say it. But until they say it, it hasn't happened. Until it has happened, there's a vacuum. As long as a vacuum, Israel's in Jabalia for the fourth time, and people are doing reserve duty. And that's the part where, if I had to sum it all up, you say, David, how would you make sense of everything you said? I would say, in the big picture, Israel has restored its sense of deterrence that it lost on October 7th. There's been a shift in the balance of power in the Middle East towards Israel, especially in these last few months, given all the blows that Iran has taken, Hezbollah has taken, Hamas is taking, the crumbling of Syria, the loss of the most crucial state, and one of the most crucial states for Iran in the Middle East, and crucial for Hezbollah, the loss of Syria. So in the macro, Israel is looking better than ever in that regard. But Gaza, to me, yes, Hamas is grounded down, but we don't know exactly how many people are hiding in tunnels and what guns they have. We know they're not an army anymore. We know that, but they're still a terror group, and they could still fire a rocket on Ashdod, Ashkelon. You say, okay, but it's not what it was. It's true, it's not what it was. But my fear is if you don't have a plan, you can't beat something with nothing. And on this one is my one discord note. I don't want to be a skunk at a garden party, but I'm worried that this is the piece of the Middle East puzzle, the map, that is unsettled. Israel's made incredible military successes, but you have to translate success in the battlefield into strategic gains. If you don't do that, you have to nail this down. And I'm a little concerned about that. And I feel that Bibi's not going to be able to keep both Trump happy and Smotrich happy. One wants him to leave Gaza and one wants him to annex Gaza. And I don't know how it's going to, I can't predict that I know exactly, but your question puts the finger on what I think is the toughest part of this, the potential of a vacuum, and the vacuum being filled by Hamas.
So let me go to an easier question.
Even if it's decimated, even if it's 5% of what it was. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to get too excited.
No, 100%. So let me go to an easier question.
Good.
Iran and the Houthis.
Yeah.
The Houthis are the one arena we haven't discussed, but they keep firing missiles.
Yeah. I don't know. Look, the whole thing also sounds like a Netflix movie. It's like these people are 1,700 kilometers away from Israel. There's no border. There's no disputed areas. But on their flag, it's like kill America and curse the Jews. Kill America and curse the Jews. 1,700 kilometers from Israel. and they're pumped up by Iran. And I know the school of thought, and I could, just in a sentence, kind of say is, okay, so you're telling me, David, Hezbollah is decimated, Iran is out of Syria, so the Syrian proxies can't fire at Israel. Who's going to take over the Qasem Soleimani ring of fire proxies? How does Iran restore itself? And I do worry that more will go to the Houthis. And I'm worried that Israel feels that like you could just keep bombing these people. All I could say is that the Saudis and the Emiratis tried to do this and it didn't end things. And they kept firing. And these people are very ideological. They're looking for a cause and they don't mind suffering. So I don't know. But it gets to your question, Rabbi, also gets to an analytical question about also where's Iran? Because Iran could have different responses to the current situation. They could say, okay, our proxy network has been really hurt badly. And therefore, we restore our deterrent by trying to rebuild the proxy network, bolster the Houthis, give money to Hezbollah for reconstruction, and hopefully over time give them weapons. Or we could speed up and try to go to a nuclear bomb because we think Israel's about to attack us. Or we could say the opposite. We're in a corner with Trump coming in. We don't know that he might unleash Israel in their mind. And maybe even the U.S. will help Israel with Fordo. Who knows? So what we got to do is preemptively cut a deal with the U.S. through what's called the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, and just say we'll agree to almost any deal to make sure there's no attack, because we're losing leverage here. We don't have the cards we used to. So I think, which way is Iran's face? Is it moving towards speeding up to a bomb? Is it trying to accelerate on the proxy network and deepen the relations with the Houthis? Or does it try to say, we're in a corner, we have no goalie, we're wide open to the Israelis, they could just walk into our country now, so let's just cut a deal on the nukes, we'll take some steps back for a few years, and then we'll see where we are later. So we don't know the answer. Yes, there's a new president in Iran who's a surgeon, he doesn't wear a turban and all this, and he keeps talking about the terrible shape of the economy. But in the end, he's not the decider. The decider is the Ayatollah. He's 85 years old. You always see him with a keffiyeh, like that he cares about the Palestinian cause. Why he does, my theory is because Iran is Shia, and they always want to prove to the Sunnis that they're more Arab than the Arabs because they're Persians. And they want to show, like the way the Alawites as a minority wanted to show, we got to prove that we're firmer than now. We're more righteous than you. We can outflank you on the right. So I don't know if it's calculus. Other Iran experts say, David, it's conviction. Look at his writings from his being a young man. And at the age of 85, how many 85-year-olds do you know who change? But we'll see. We'll see what he is. But he's not reckless on certain ways. And if he thinks that he doesn't have as many cards, I wouldn't rule out that he would try to cut a deal with the U.S. on the nuclear issue. But I think they have a real fork in the road, the Iranians. One way is, in the fork, accelerate the road to the bomb and restore the proxies, like more on the Houthis. And the other approach is cut a deal with the Trump administration in Vienna at the IAEA. That's the fork they're at.
We have about 4 minutes left, and I have about 5 questions.
Go for it. With lightning round. I got to make short answers.
The lightning round. ICC, ICJ.
It's a mess.
60 seconds.
It's a mess. I don't have good answers on this one. I mean, we'll see if there's going to be new legislation with the new Congress that comes in on sanctions on them. And you notice, what's his, Gallant, who I saw, the defense minister visits the U.S. The U.S. isn't a signatory of the ICC, so it's not an issue. But what does the Europeans do? And France, that wanted to be brought in to be part of the team on the ceasefire, the day they were brought in, they said, oh, we're not going to abide by this. We will meet with Netanyahu. We will meet with, so we'll see what the Brits do, what do the Germans do, what do some of the others do. I think it's a mark of shame for them, but I don't claim that I have the answer and whether legislation in the U.S. is going to reverse this or not. But it's a good question.
Okay, two more questions.
Sure.
We'll leave the hardest one for last. Well,
Okay.
actually, second last, because I want to end on something positive.
Good.
All of Israel's internal political turmoil related to Bibi, the trial,
Yeah.
the demonstrations, there's so many different aspects of it. How much of it is impacting the war decisions? What do you see the judicial reform, which is back on the conversation? Where do you see that all going, if at all?
Look, it's a huge question. I look, I think part of the greatness of Israel after October the 7th was that on one hand, I would mention at the start, like at Hanukkah, the resilience of the people, but Israel in wartime is able to respond to external threats. The brilliance, I think, of the Israeli people after October the 7th, maybe that's not the right word, but the greatness of them was that they also were able to recover from internal division from within, and it all kind of washed away. The Arabs, once again, underestimated Israel and its ability to come together in a crisis. But here was coming together after it was probably the most divisive period in Israeli history, where you felt that the very fabric of the society was being ripped at. And yet, the same people said they weren't going to fly. Everybody flew. The Achim Laneshek, the group that was doing a lot of demonstrations, they were taking people to their reserve duty. So, I mean, I think the Arabs, and I know Nasrallah was giving speeches, the Israel's at its weakest, and now where's Nasrallah? He's dead. And Israel's come together. And I worry that there's a little, given all the developments, we're all very excited about the developments of the last few months, with Hezbollah and Syria and Iran and all that. I'm worried that some people believe the war is almost over. So let's go back we could rewind the tape and bring back that division. Then it means to me we haven't learned anything. I was very impressed by a headline of Yisrael Hayom, which was a right of center newspaper, when this thing came back of Levin, and here was a right of center paper, although it's not as reflexively pro Netanyahu as it was, but he said, like, Lola Madnu Klum or something like that. We didn't learn anything from what happened, how we have to stick together. And so I somehow have more hope in the people of Israel than some of the politicians, that they will remember that divisive period and won't want to revisit it. Doesn't mean the courts shouldn't tweak certain things. I think there are things that everyone would agree that needs to happen, but we should not relive those dark days of 2023 that I think brought, October 7th, because it led the Arabs to think the Jews were weak and they were utterly divided, and that was not the case, and we should not go back there.
Last question, and then we're going to wrap up. And this is my question. This is a personal question.
Sure.
This week I was watching one of the Israeli news broadcasts in English, ILTV, and they had an interview with your brother. And he made a really interesting comment about an effort underway to secure an Israel-U.S. strategic defense treaty in sort of a parallel to the effort on the Abraham Accords with Saudi Arabia. Thoughts about it, and how realistic is it?
Well, you don't expect me to go against my brother. Two St. Louisans, No, I mean, I'm very proud of my brother, and I think he's right. I mean, I think the Israeli defense establishment before October 7th had a reflexive antagonism to a defense treaty, because the only words, sorry, I don't know if I'm unfrozen.
That's okay.
Okay, the only words the Israeli defense is there, and I had this conversation many times with Gadi Eisenkot, former chief of staff and member of the war cabinet, and he is more like it's going to tie Israel's hands. Israel's going to need permission from the U.S. But the rough part, and we didn't have a chance to discuss this as a whole conversation of itself, maybe we should do a separate Zoom on this, is when you have a 7-front war, 7 fronts, the net effect is that April 13th couldn't have happened without the U.S. working with Israel. And I think if it's tightly tailored, not that any war you want to bring in the U.S., but if there's a nuclear strike on Israel, it means the U.S. will respond. I do think that is a deterrent to the Iranians because what they don't want is to fight the United States. They know that their Air Force is from the 1960s, and I mean their president was killed in a helicopter from the Shah's time. Their hardware is terrible. What they have is drones and they have missiles, and but they don't have an Air Force, a Navy that's at all serious. And I think it would send a message to say, if we contemplate a nuclear strike on Israel, we're at war with America. So I do think there's a logic to it, especially if it's paired with a Saudi deal where if there's going to be a U.S.-Saudi defense treaty, certainly why not a U.S.-Israel defense treaty? Why not?
I agree. I think we're going to have to wrap it up here, but I'm going to take you at your word. You offered another follow-up Zoom. So I'm going to take you at your word, and we're going to schedule it.
All right.
Seven Front War, U.S.-Israel Strategic Defense Treaty. Let's schedule it.
Yeah, and we're bringing my brother too, because he's done a lot of work on this.
For sure. Happy to.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time.
Delighted.
Thank you very much for your insights. And thank you all for listening and for joining us. And again, a special shout out and thank you to the JCRC for co-sponsoring and co-hosting this and organizing all the technical stuff on the Zoom. And I don't want to keep you longer than we set out, but
No.
really we could listen to you for hours. So thank you.
Thank you, and happy Hanukkah to everybody in St. Louis, and pray for the Cardinals to have a better series and a season with Chaim Bloom. Maybe he'll join. I don't know. Maybe he's a member of one of the synagogues in St. Louis, if it's Young Israel or another one.
He hasn't joined Young Israel yet, but we never know.
Well, I hope you get him, and I hope he'll have an impact on the Cardinals. But seriously, I wish everyone a happy Hanukkah. For those of you who want to do more deep dives, I tried in an hour to deal with everything, but in the podcast, each issue is an hour. So decision points.
If you could just remind everybody the name of that podcast.
Decision points. And you go wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple, Spotify, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I hope you listen to it. And thank the JCRC, and I want to thank Young Israel and you, Rabbi, and wish everyone, again, happy Hanukkah and good times ahead.
Thank you very much. The same to you. And thank you all for joining. Signing off.
Signing off.